Hey, I'm McCoy here, and you are listening to the Solar Panel, the Phoenix Suns Show.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Suns Solar Panel. I am obviously not Tim Tompkins because it's much smoother when we do the intro with the Tim, but I'm Greg Esposito, host today, alongside Dave King, as always.
Yo.
And we are excited to bring you another fun-filled edition of the Suns Solar Panel, talking about the second worst team in the NBA, not the first. I guess technically after the tiebreaker.
Technically third worst.
Third worst team in the NBA. So that's
looking up, man.
Yeah, it's 2 spots higher than last year, all right?
Went from very worst a year ago. We're 3 times as good this year as last year.
Yeah, and except no substitutes, by the way. There is a Barstool Sports Red Sox podcast that's out there pretending to be a Suns podcast right now because they lost a bet, calling themselves Suns Out, Guns Out, trying to claim they're the number one Suns podcast on the internet. Screw you guys. We've suffered and slogged through almost 3 years of this stuff. So go back to being Red Sox fans and leave us the hell alone, basically.
Hey, at least we got AKA'd.
Yeah, that's true.
As opposed to the other Suns, 82 Suns podcasts out there.
That's true. Well, at first I saw this thing and I was like, oh crap, there's another Suns podcast, and then I realized what was going on. I think they're called Section 10 or something. They're a Red Sox podcast. Lost a bet a bet to a Red Yankees podcast, so they had to do an episode as a Suns podcast, I think.
That was their punishment.
Yeah,
their punishment is to try to be us.
Yeah, and we do it for pretty much free every weekend.
On purpose.
Yeah.
We didn't even lose a bet, Greg.
No, well, I feel like somehow in life we kind of did lose a bet, though, and that's how we wound up
Can you
here.
Imagine? I mean, come on. Your punishment is to act like you're the Sun's solar panel.
That's punishment for a lot of people. Listening to the Suns Solar Panel is punishment for some people as well. So, especially when Tim's not
that might
here.
Put us at the top of the reverse standings.
I heard Tim's out exploring the strip clubs of Florida, is what we were told. So Tim,
he clarified for us opening times on the strip clubs.
Yeah. Yes. It's apparently too early when we record this for him to actually be doing that. So,
I will tell you from my experience 20 years ago when I was last on the singles scene, they do open for lunch.
I've heard that, and I don't think I'd trust a buffet at any of those, especially.
I don't think I'd want to see
Florida.
Any of those places with daylight streaming through any windows. Although
they don't have windows.
Yeah, I was going to say most of the time you drive through those places and they're just these. Yeah, just straight big cement blocks just parked in the middle of a block.
So Tim will have a full breakdown of South Florida's finest when he comes
with one
back.
Tiny nondescript door that looks like it almost can't open because it's been painted shut. Yeah.
Dave's explaining the seedy parts of Phoenix that he's been to.
Even good parts of Phoenix. If there's a strip club there, they all look the same.
Hey, you want to have a bad transition? Let's talk about people who were kind enough to donate money. I don't have I was trying to figure this out where Tim pulls names from of people who've donated, and I can't figure that out. So thank you to everyone this week who's donated $1, $5, $10. If you want to donate $100 a month, whatever floats your boat. I can't guarantee what we'll talk about on Twitter, but I can tell you that we'll talk about the Suns right here. So thank you, all of you. If you want to donate, there is a link in the show notes below. You can click there, or if you're listening on Bright Side of the Sun, there's a link in the post as well. We thank you for supporting the show. And then if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to hold up here. I am rocking my new Valley Boys shirt that I got. Thank you to the guys over at Valley-Boys. That's BOYZ.com. They have some fabulous merchandise over there that you can pick up: shirts, hoodies, men's, women's. I even think they got some kids merch over there. So if you're looking to pick up some quality looking t-shirts that's got the Valley Boys moniker on it. Head over there, and you may eventually see a collaboration between us and them on the T-shirt front. So keep
The
your eyes open.
Valley Solar Boys panel.
Yeah, Valley Pod Boys, maybe. I don't know. You might see a little collab with them. So definitely check
Bring in
them
the desert
out.
heat.
Yeah, valley-boys.com. I was actually interacting with them on Twitter. They slid into my DMs this week. We had a good conversation, and I'm surprised that did I use that wrong? Am I not one of the cool kids when I say that? I
Sliding into DMs.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone listening to this show wants to hear about anyone sliding into Greg Esposito's DMs.
via the Valley Boys. But quality shirt too. I wasn't sure what to expect. Sometimes you order these online T-shirts, and as you can tell, I'm a connoisseur of it. I wear something a little different every week, and this is quality stuff. So well worth the cash that you might spend on that. So after you're done donating your $1 a month, head over to valley-boys.com. Check out these shirts. You can look cool while supporting your Suns, which is tough these years. Is looking cool while being a Suns fan, but they make it pretty easy. So, Dave, I heard we had a few questions from fans this week that came up on Twitter. And coming up on the podcast, if you're slogging through this and going, oh my God, we missed Tim, and wish these
There's
two
no
would
structure.
talk.
There's no direction. We're screwed.
We will be having Sam Vecenie, the great writer from The Athletic, on. He did a extensive piece on what the Suns offseason needs to look like. So we thought we would get him on the program, discuss that, and he was kind enough to say, yeah, sure, why not? I don't know who the heck you guys are, but we'll talk anyways. So.
He does know who we are. What are you talking about?
I know.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it too. That's coming up in about 15 minutes or so. So for the next 15 minutes, you just get to hear Dave and Greg try to answer some of our listener questions. So we posed the question on Twitter earlier this week, the other day, actually probably yesterday. What do you want us to talk about on tomorrow's show? So that makes sense that it was yesterday.
Which would be Friday because we record on Saturday, and this is all just damn confusing right now.
The first response was, don't talk politics like Dave King NBA seems to do. I occasionally retweet other posts that show up in my feed. I don't actually generally, in fact, almost never actually talk my own politics. I'm fairly apolitical. I just find some things funny, and other people don't find them as funny as I do. And I'm sorry to hear that. So I hope I don't offend anybody on my Twitter handle, but I think you're probably talking about a 99% basketball related and 1% retweets of hilarious things out there that I find hilarious. So you can just scroll past those.
Technically, isn't it work? Because don't you work in government? So yeah, I think it just counts as work. But
totally apolitical. I work for a non-political government entity. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, leave Dave alone on Twitter. I mean, I wish he'd shut up about everything, but he won't. So just scroll past it and enjoy the rest. So I promise I won't ever talk politics because my brother works in it and I get enough of it in text messages with him. So don't worry about it. I'm just gonna make dumb dad jokes on Twitter because that's what you're all here for. So
we had another question. This from Jake Bronger, who's a big fan of the show and on Twitter and all that. Jake suggests that he and Justin of the Fanning the Flames podcast had an idea that the Suns should really build their team around Jimmer Fredette. So the Suns should really actually just blow out that entire theme and make it a whole team that's around their value coming out of the draft and has nothing to do with their value in the NBA. So the suggestions are to round out the roster around Jimmer Fredette with such players as Adam Morrison, Johnny Flynn, Anthony Bennett, and they didn't mention this, but I'll go ahead and say the Candyman, Michael Olowokandi. If we could just get those guys on the team with the head coach being Jake Sakalidis, for some reason Jake is the head coach and not one of the players. Maybe they need to be young enough to still play. I'm not really sure.
Shouldn't Skidishvili be the head coach?
Nicholas
Skidishvili. I mean, I think that Oh, and doesn't that mean Dragan Bender gets to keep a spot on this roster?
Yeah,
Dragon's getting re-signed.
Saints would actually on this roster, they'd probably give him a max contract.
Isn't that the way that they fielded the last few teams outside of
We'd have to actually bring back Marquise Chris, right? He'll be a free agent this summer.
Yeah, I think you'd have to do that. I'm trying to think of Anthony Bennett gets a home back here, which is nice. He spent a cup of coffee in
the
preseason.
Naz Suns. Yeah,
he played preseason with the regular Suns, so you get to see Anthony Bennett back in purple and orange. The scary thing is, when a team's tanking, that's actually the kind of guys that they look at. Oh, hey, look at this guy had a bunch of potential. We're just trying to rework that value. The only way I bring Adam Morrison back is if he grew the hair back out and had the mustache.
Well, you have to have the hair and the mustache.
Yeah,
there is no Adam Morrison without the hair and mustache.
Well, there is. I saw him not too long ago.
I think he had to change his name then. Somebody that's just not the same guy.
Oh no, I'd actually rather have Van Morrison than Adam Morrison on a team at this point. But
even though he's dead, yes.
I love that this is the things that Suns Twitter is talking about now, because everybody else has got playoff fever, and we're talking about making sarcastic jokes about building around Jimmer Fredette. It's wonderful that's where we are. Like
here we are.
It's almost 10 years since the last time we saw playoff basketball. The world's got the NBA world has fever in terms of playoff basketball right now, watching good hoops, and we're stuck here talking about this. And poor Sam Vecenie has to write 2,000 words about.
Well, he did it early in the offseason, so it's only uphill. It only goes up from there for Sam.
So. Do we have another question that isn't completely sarcastic? All right.
Yeah, we have another question. Actually, this we can get a little philosophical about this one, and not in a sarcastic way. We had a couple of questions. One from Definitely Not Ryan McDonough on Twitter, and one from Joe Shook, and they're very similar. They're basically what are realistic options in the off season. And before we go into that, I want to talk to you, Greg, about what do you think people mean when they ask about a realistic trade?
Well, I think that's probably one where both sides are going to agree on it. Like, we can sit here and we go, well, you can match the salaries up, and if you do X, Y, and Z, you could wind up getting Karl Anthony Towns, or you could wind up getting Damian Lillard. And yeah, great. It could work under the CBA, but are those teams going to actually pull the trigger and say yes? And usually the answer is no, they will not. And I think that's where we get into this. Is it a realistic trade or not? And I think that's the toughest thing. Or realistic free agent signings. Yeah, Kevin Durant's a free agent this year. Yes, if you make X amount of moves, you can get to a max slot as this Suns roster.
But here's my problem with that. Don't you think we would have said Tyson Chandler was not a realistic free agent signing because nobody had mentioned him before the topic even came up?
No, Tyson Chandler was the kind of name that you could go, okay, I believe that. But LaMarcus Aldridge was one where I would have told you not a chance in hell. And it turned out it was slightly better than not a chance in hell, but they wound up still not getting him. So, like, I think you could get somebody that's on the downturn that used to be a star. Now, I don't have a name off the top of my head. That might.
Well, let's just keep going. Hold on. I want to explore more the concept of realistic trade, because sure, you could even get like what an objective person might consider a doable trade. Like in the last few years, I've been part of SB Nation's annual mock draft, and most of those years we've been allowed to do trades, and so you would think that fanboys from two different franchises making, or three or more franchises making a trade would make it realistic, because fans of a team are always a little polarized on their own players. They either love their players or they hate their players. And if you love a player, you overvalue him. And if you hate a player, you undervalue him. That's just natural. So if you can get the fans of another team who have that, who suffer from that same affliction, and you execute a trade, then you can call that realistic. But my concern, my issue with overall coming up with what's a realistic trade is That doesn't mean the GMs of those teams would actually make that same trade, because they have their own biases. They have their own favorites on their team that they overvalue and undervalue. How many years in a row did we hear that Danny Ainge would not include Terry Rozier in any trade? I think we heard he was like their favorite player out of all the players on his roster. He's the one that they would not trade early in his career. And then Terry Rozier had that great playoff run last year, and suddenly people started talking about Rozier being a huge target in restricted free agency. And now this year, Rozier has been awful, and now he might not even get an offer in restricted free agency. So it all GMs have their own favorites, the guys they love, the guys they hate, and they value them differently too. So when you say realistic trades, I have a hard time with that, because I can tell you a fair trade from my point of view, and that's fairly myopic because I don't watch every minute of every basketball game. And even people who watch all the basketball games don't have the same opinion of players that the guys who actually executes the trades do. So I think it's tough, and that's why I almost never recommend like this trade or that trade, because I get struck by, but what I would do isn't necessarily what anybody else would do.
Well,
So,
that's what I call the Garrett Seiler effect. Remember Garrett, who was a Lance Blank's pet project that he was in love with, where everybody else went, this isn't an NBA talent. Like, you wind up there is a rationality in this, because yes, these are humans. This isn't NBA 2K19's AI that's trying to decide if a trade is fair or not. And to your point, realistic, when that's said, is usually interchangeable to people and fans online as fair, right? And yes, what looks like a fair deal to us and to everybody may not be the case to GMs, and it comes down to what's their vision too. And that's something we don't have a clear view of right now either, is what is James Jones' vision for this Phoenix Suns team, for this roster? What is he looking to accomplish? Does he believe in some of these core pieces? Does he think TJ Warren is part of this future, or Josh Jackson? Does he not like any of them? I don't know where he stands. And that's the toughest part about trying to project something that's realistic or fair for this Suns team, is we don't know what James Jones really views. We know he's likely has an affinity for Kelly Oubre and Tyler Johnson because he acquired them, but we don't know. We don't know what he thinks about the head coach at this point. We don't even know if his job's safe.
And we can even talk about the Kelly Oubre trade for a minute. I know, Greg, you want to give James Jones all the credit in the world for that trade. But that was a trade of a happy accident. It did just happen. And on some level, you could say that maybe the Suns didn't like Kelly Oubre and they really wanted Dillon Brooks, who ended up being out for the year. So no one actually saw Dillon Brooks this year. And Brooks has more years under team control, low salary control, like 2 more years than Kelly Oubre, who now is an unrestricted or a restricted free agent, and will suddenly the Suns either have to let him go for nothing or pay him $15 million or so. So yeah, the James Jones would have rathered Dillon Brooks, but it's also possible he was never even offered Kelly Oubre, and maybe he really liked Kelly Oubre better, but he wasn't offered Kelly Oubre in that trade because the Grizzlies wanted Kelly Oubre, and that was the primary trade partners on a deal that was trying to be brokered by Washington, who messed it all up. So even then, excuse me, I'm choking on my own spit. Even then, you don't know how much James Jones likes or did like or will like Kelly Oubre or Dillon Brooks or Tyler Johnson. Tyler Johnson's better than Ryan Anderson.
Yeah, well, that's true. But cost $6 more million than Ryan Anderson was going to cost. So and the other factors, we don't know how much Jeff Bauer is going to have an influence here. Who does he like? Who doesn't he like? I mean, you're gonna make the assumption that Darren Collison would be a point guard that they targeted because that Bauer drafted him, if I remember that correctly. But there's a lot of assumptions you have to make, and we're not going to have any clue until after the lottery, even well after the lottery. But you're gonna if they make a trade, we may
never know.
Well, that's true.
Who the Suns really like, because who they really liked is the guy they ended up with. no matter whether they like that person or not, right?
Oh, yeah, in the draft for sure, but
But even in trades,
yeah.
trade acquisitions, whoever came in is the guy you always wanted.
Yeah, well, that's true because you win a press conference like that, and that's the main concern of organizations. And the thing is, everything you read, especially you look at the NFL draft right now, and you've got a million rumors and who's doing what, yada yada. Well, all of those come through a biased lens. I mean, the team's going to reach out to reporters with their angle on things and looking through their prism, and having been on that side. That information is obviously skewed to be team friendly. Details are left out. The facts are positioned in a way that makes a team look a certain way, and that's neither good nor bad. That's just the team covering their backside. Agents do the same thing. Players to a lesser extent. It depends on who the player is and if they're savvy enough. I mean, LeBron James very much skews things that he says to fit a particular narrative, and some players do that. Others are more freewheeling with their comments, but things are certainly skewed. So even when we get into things and you hear, oh, this is who the Suns really like or don't like, you can't even take that at face value, or this is how certain things happened or didn't happen. You can't take that at full face value either. You've got to try to understand where did the information come from and who does it benefit most.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. It could come from agents. It could come from players' friends. It could come from all these rumors. They can come from like the 15th guy down the totem pole in a team's front office who was talking to the 12th guy down the totem pole, who they both agreed that X would fit well with the team. And now they've told a media person, and now team source says that the team is interested in X.
It could be a scout that's standing for the guy that he likes and saying that he very much likes this person, and then all of a sudden it's the Suns organization or the Cardinals, whoever it is, have interest in X, Y, or Z. So you've got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, and then you got to also that same source may not be telling the truth all the time too. Like James Jones apparently was approached by some media at a road game, I believe, and they asked him, or maybe scouting a college game, and they asked him about Ja Morant, and James Jones gave an answer that sounded like he might like Ja Morant better than Zion Williamson. And to me, that sounds completely nonsensical, not only from a talent point of view, but also from a James Jones point of view. Just back in January, James Jones, on Brightside Night, made it totally clear that he had no interest in adding a 19-year-old point guard to the team. And that was when Ja Morant was the number 2 prospect even at that time. And he said he had no interest in adding a 19-year-old to the team because their future is now. And a 19-year-old point guard, your point guard of the future, is by definition the future, not the present. So I'm gonna read this quote to you. When you draft as high as we have in the draft, top 5, top 10, that's a potential proposition where the best player could fit you right now. Maybe a college guy, a 4-year guy, someone who's more mature, 22, 23 years old, kind of like a Mikal Bridges. But if you take a guy in the top 5, everyone wants you to go get a guy who can be the next Hall of Fame point guard at 18 or 19, aka Ja Morant. If you add an 18 or 19-year-old with a 20 or 21-year-old, which is the current core on the Suns, you have that point guard of the future. But the future's now, and that's why free agency or the draft are your 2 options. For us, it'll be most likely free agency. So sure sounds like in January he wasn't in love with Ja Morant. Maybe watching one game of Ja changed his mind, but I really doubt it.
Which to me thinks, okay, what are realistic trades? Now we'll go back to what that is, and it's probably trades that free up cap space to then pursue more free agents. Because right now where they're sitting, based on Sam Vecenie's article, it looked like they had about $8.9 million to potentially spend if they do nothing at this point.
Yeah, it all depends on what you count for. It all depends on what you count for cap holds and which players you think you're going to keep and which players you're not. I got the Suns down to around 7 million if they keep the cap holds for some players and release some others. So Sam's got a slightly different variation at the 8 or 9, but it's all right in that range between 7 and 10 million.
Okay, so even at 7 and 10 million, you're not a major player.
Actually, you know what? Let's add Sam and let's start talking to Sam about this stuff. What do you think?
All right. Yep. We'll take a break and we'll be right back with Sam Vecenie of The Athletic to talk Suns. Welcome back into the Sun Solar Panel. Greg Esposito, Dave King, and extremely excited to welcome in Sam Vecenie, a veteran NBA writer and covering all things NBA for The Athletic and all around the internet. I highly recommend following him on Twitter, reading him on The Athletic. Sam, how are you, my friend?
Man, where is the time gone? I am now considered a veteran writer. Oh, geez.
Well, when like 600 random guys a day come into the fray, you just have to last like 10 weeks to be considered a veteran at this point.
It's a good point. It's a very good point at this stage. No, thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, I had some fun writing about the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, I want to know. We've got the NBA playoffs going on, all this excitement, and how did you draw the short straw to have to write an in-depth piece on the Phoenix Suns and what they might do this offseason?
Well, you know what? Like, the playoffs are fun. I enjoy watching the playoffs. I break it down on my podcast. Like, you know, look, the playoffs are great. Basketball is awesome. But at the end of the day, what my responsibility is at The Athletic is to talk more on the team building side, right? Like, I look at things more from like the bigger picture scale, I guess, and try and figure out where things are going to go. So, you know, it's funny, but I love this stuff. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't love it. I think it's fantastic.
Well, we think it's fantastic too, Sam. Anytime a non-local writer writes something that isn't a complete joke article about the Suns, we just gotta like sop it up and we're just gonna cherish it all summer long. So we definitely appreciate this.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you.
You didn't even mention goats.
I didn't. I don't think I pulled punches necessarily on Robert Sarver and James Jones and some of the stuff I've heard, but like, yeah, look, it's kind of an idiot-proof situation now in a lot of ways. Like, you know,
hold my beer is what Robert Sarver's saying right now.
Like, they have Deandre Ayton, they have Devin Booker. Like, this is a situation that so many organizations would be hoping for and clamoring for. Like, this, you got to be able to figure this one out.
Yeah, but we're the Eeyores of fan bases. We sit here and go, yeah, but you know, we've been through 10 years of this and false hope and seen different things. But let's start with kind of where you were talking, James Jones and Robert Sarver. What is the perception around the league of the removing the interim tag of James Jones and then the hiring of Jeff Bower as well?
So Jeff Bower, I will say, like, people that I've talked to say that he adds a real level of credibility, right? Like, he is actually a guy that has been around. He knows what he's doing. They need someone that can do this. Now, I don't necessarily know what exactly his role is going to be within the hierarchy, right? Like, he has a title, but it's very unclear. Like, is he the number 2 guy? Is Trevor Buckstein still going to be the number 2 guy? Like, how are they going to be on the same level? You know what I mean? Like, there are still some questions there. I would imagine that Trevor is going to handle more of the cap related stuff, and Jeff is going to handle just some more granular thought processes on decision making. But ultimately, it's always going to be James's call, and it's always going to be Robert's call. You know, at the end of the day, given that Robert Sarver has never stopped meddling in any organization.
James's call with Robert's permission, or Robert's call with James being the mouthpiece.
With Trevor Buckstein being the guy that figures out, does it work within the cap, and how do we make this actually work from an NBA standpoint? I mean,
that's my impression as well.
Stan Van Gundy obviously likes Jeff Bower. He worked with him for 4 years, and I find it interesting. Stan's the one who hired Jeff, but Jeff's the one who fired Stan, because Jeff was the GM, but Stan was the president of basketball operations. So that's quite interesting. And The Detroit fans complain that Jeff Bower's biggest problem is that he wasn't the adult in the room. So either he was totally on board with all the awful draft decisions that the Pistons made in those 4 years he was in Detroit, and the trades, and well, not necessarily the trades, they won those, but the free agent signings where they accidentally hard capped themselves on July 1st at noon, signing I believe it was Langston Galloway, that Jeff Bower wasn't the adult in the room. But the problem is when the adult or the guy you're trying to control is Stan Van Gundy, I'm not sure that's possible. Whereas in Phoenix, you can't control Robert Sarver for sure, but you can potentially, as Jeff Bower, give a little bit of adulting to an NBA front office anyway, with James Jones being so new to it. So I'm hoping he has a quiet kind of the presence that, see, the guy who had a small role in the recruitment, not a large one, but a small role in the recruitment was Lon Babby, who vetted some of the candidates, and I can see Lon trying to put someone in that front office who will just help round out, fill in some missing links and missing skills, and the skills that Bauer brings are definitely skills that the current front office did not have.
Well, having
go ahead, Espo.
I was just going to say, having spent 5 years within that organization, I can tell you that the structure of this isn't really going to matter. It's very much kind of a Game of Thrones. Whoever's willing to do whatever it takes to get in favor with Robert and have his idea reign supreme is the one that's likely going to have the power. And the way this is structured, I think that falls on James Jones, because everything I've heard, Jeff Bower, very nice guy, very, very knowledgeable around the league, but he's not the guy that's going to try to be the loudest room in the voice. And knowing Trevor Buckstein, that's the same way. So I think this defaults to James Jones is going to be the voice, whether he's the adult in the room or not.
Well, here's the thing about where the Suns are right now, because the things that I hear are that this team really needs to up its internal communication even, right? They have really, really poor internal communication among all of the staffers. So if Jeff Bower can just play a calming role in those waters, this is probably a win, right? If they can just find a way to just deal with communication internally, that's the biggest thing, right? And it goes toward what you hear, and Adrian Wojnarowski reported, I can tell you the same from talking to executives around the league, the Suns just don't have a presence out on the scouting trail, right? They'll have maybe a guy or two here or there. It's not that people don't see the Phoenix Suns on the scouting trail, it's that they don't see a lot of them on the scouting trail. So it's just a weird deal, man. And then you hear about oh yeah, we're going to use technology to identify YouTube, potential draftees and scouting. And it's just is this supposed to be some massive innovation?
What if you found out, Sam? What if you found out that Sam Vecenie was the primary source of draft scouting for the Phoenix Suns?
I would laugh. I would say, give me $200,000.
But I don't want to, and I don't want to belittle this at all, because really, haven't the draft scouts been about as accurate in predicting, NBA talent as front offices?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's an inexact science. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. I think that John Gavoni and Mike Schmitz, those guys are really good at what they do. And you talk to some NBA scouts and you come away a little bit less impressed with the profession as you get to know them. But there are really, really smart people in these organizations for the most part, especially at the highest levels of organizations. For instance, if I talk to Lawrence Frank on something, if I talk to, someone else like that, I come away remarkably impressed with these human beings, right? At the end of the day, these guys are basketball effing geniuses. I don't even know if I can swear on this podcast.
You can.
You certainly can.
Okay, that's good to know for the future. Yeah. These guys are super smart guys for the most part. And it's kind of what's maddening about the James Jones hire in general a little bit, because James I don't really mind when people skip the line if there is like an intuitive genius there. I haven't seen that yet. And just in what I've heard about the way the organization is running, I don't know that is the case with James.
Robert Sarver would never hire an intuitive genius.
Like,
because that person would threaten Robert Sarver's existence.
Right. So, like, here's the thing. Like, there are really smart executives out there that they could have looked at. Like, I don't know if David Griffin would have wanted to come back to Phoenix after having been in this Game of Thrones style situation, but like, call David and see what's going on.
Yeah, I had a quick little exchange with David one time, and he basically said that he doesn't imagine the Suns ever calling him.
Yeah, that's insane, by the way. David is... Griff is legit like one of the smartest people working in basketball.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would all love it if he would have come back here.
Well, and when a guy who literally grew up in your franchise, I mean, he started as a PR intern in 92, 93, worked his way through the PR department, wound up in basketball ops, all in Phoenix. Doesn't believe that he'll get a call or get even an opportunity to come back home, if you will. That's a problem, and that's concerning.
So like, the thing that worries me about James Jones is that he didn't like come up in this, right? Like, he was an assistant GM for like 1 year, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what you hear coming out of the organization right now are the hallmarks of an executive that is still learning on the job a little bit. And that's a scary proposition whenever you have guys out on the marketplace who wouldn't have to learn on the job, right? Like, you can try and reach out to Mike Zerrin. You can try and reach out to Mike Winger with the Clippers. You can try and reach out to Trent Redden, who's probably going to go to New Orleans to go back with him.
Yeah,
you try and reach out to
those other organizations are doing. Yes.
Right. Like, you can try and reach out to these guys who are genuine, like, basketball front office guys who can help you run the day-to-day of the organization. We'll see what happens with James Jones. Like, I'm not going to rule anything out with him because he's still a relatively new figure in all of this front office world, and I wish him the best. But, just what you've heard so far, it is a little bit concerning.
So what we've established so far is a subscription to The Athletic and maybe ESPN Insider isn't a significant enough scouting department for an NBA franchise. So I think we tend to agree there. But you called this you called this basically an idiot-proof situation. You have Deandre Ayton. You talk about this in the piece.
So James Jones proof.
Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, and you talk about how those are quality building blocks. But then in the piece you get into, okay, if that's the case, what does the future look like this offseason? Looking into your crystal ball, and for those that haven't fully read the piece, what do you look at this offseason as being kind of the approach that you feel the Suns are going to take? Not that they should, but that they're going to look at taking this offseason.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot of it depends on the draft lottery, right? What pick do they end up with? Where do they end up selecting? If they're in the top two, I think a lot of things just kind of fall into place a little bit more naturally. If they're not in the top two, I think that things get more complicated. One thing that I would expect is that they try and get some sort of salary cap space, right? They have the ability to do so pretty easily, I think. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I wouldn't want to have both TJ Warren and Kelly Oubre on my team when they're both going to have to be paid $20 to $25 million a year combined, something like that at the end of the day. Right. So, and like,
with Mikal Bridges waiting to play.
Right. And Mikal's there and Josh is there. Like, there's just a lot there. Right, especially if you end up at number one, like Zion Williamson is going to take minutes to 4. There's just a lot there still that they need to figure out. So I look at TJ Warren as like a prime trade candidate. Like, he's very interesting in a lot of ways because the 3-point shot improvement while still small sample, is very interesting. He does still tend to have this like tendency, that's bad English, but to ISO unnecessarily. But I wonder if like you get him with the right coach, you can just kind of break that habit and go, hey, TJ, we still want you to be aggressive, but we want you to shoot the three off the catch as 50% of your offense instead of 30% of your offense, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I wonder how that's all going to shake out, because clearly TJ, he had ankle issues, and he just at some point just decided, you know what, my ankle's kind of sore, I'm not going to play, and the team agreed that he wasn't going to play, and then he never came back, and he was in late January, he was only 5 3-point attempts short of getting a $250,000 bonus. And he never even played another game the last 33 games. And it was really common knowledge that he was healthy enough to have played in the last few weeks of the season and just didn't.
It's very, very weird. It's very weird. I don't really understand what happened there.
It's another hallmark of the Sun situation, that we've seen this happen in a few ways.
But we thought that kind of thing was, well, we hoped that kind of thing was in the past, that it was that James Jones would be able to smooth that out a little bit. And you know what? They made some huge progress with Devin Booker. A year ago, Devin Booker had his exit interview was, I'm tired of losing. I'm never going to miss the playoffs again. This team needs to make some big changes, blah, 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 blah. This year, in the same exit interviews and the same season that TJ Warren just decided not to play the last 33 games, Devin Booker said, you know what? The culture has already changed. I think we're really moving toward the future. We know what winning basketball can look like. And he's talking about a 10-game stretch out of the season where Kelly Oubre and Tyler Johnson were healthy, and adding just a level of maturity to the Suns rotation that had 7 guys age 22 or younger in it.
Yeah, like having an adult guard actually helps.
Yes. Even if it's Tyler Johnson, it was amazing, the difference. And we had talked all season how all you needed was a competent adult guard playing next to Devin Booker, and the team would look so different. And they did. They won 6 out of 10 games, including 2 wins against conference leaders.
Yeah, and like Tyler Johnson shot like shit while he
Yeah.
was in Phoenix, and he was still a very useful upgrade for Phoenix.
He was actually the calming influence in closing situations. Like, Devin Booker went through a phase where he rightly could not trust anybody around him in closing situations. So he had like something like a 75% usage rate for a while in clutch situations when the Suns actually had a chance to win. And it wasn't because Devin Booker was being selfish, because he actually had a huge reputation for passing the ball to shooters who just couldn't make the shot in closing. Even that 59-point game he had, he passed the ball for 3 open threes in the last minute and a half and didn't take a shot.
Unfortunately, they were mostly to Jimmer Fredette, who couldn't even get in the same zip code.
And one was to Troy Daniels.
And, shout out Jimmer, man.
Yeah.
What a move.
Oh my gosh.
So in this trade scenario, you're talking, looking at moving a TJ Warren. In the piece, you talk maybe a Josh Jackson. How do you accomplish that to get this cap space? Some of our listeners may not understand how that would work and how that would free up cap space. So could you kind of walk us through what that would look like?
Sure. So there are a lot of NBA teams this summer, because the cap is rising a little bit, because we're kind of getting farther and farther out from that disaster summer that was 2016, if I remember correctly. It might have been 2015. I think it was 2016, where they just gave out like money like it was nothing, and like totally threw away flexibility for multiple years with many organizations. We're getting farther and farther from that now, which has created a circumstance where more teams have actual cap space to utilize now. I would guess that something like half the NBA, maybe a little bit more than that, has like $10 million in cap space this summer. Maybe not max cap space, but enough to really be able to make moves.
So you're not, sorry, Sam, you're not worried that we're going to have 2016 all over again because of the money that's available?
I'm not, to an extent. I think that the NBA has generally learned and has become more fiscally conscious in regard to length of contracts. It's kind of similar to what we're seeing in Major League Baseball. Like Major League Baseball, no one over 30 is getting like money right now. Basically, everyone is trying to trickle the money down to younger players because they understand that's where the value is. It's not to that extent in basketball yet, but I do think that front office executives have learned from the mistake that was giving Jan Mahinmi 4 years, $70 million.
Timofey Mozgov.
Yeah, like Timofey Mozgov got 464. Luol Deng got 472. Evan Turner got
Lakers.
470, I believe, or 475. Harrison Barnes got 484 or something. Like, we're just getting farther and farther from that now, and the books are getting clearer and clearer.
That was the same summer that, wasn't it, that Tyler Johnson and Alan Crabb got those big offers from the Nets?
It was.
Too?
Yep, it absolutely was. So as we get farther and farther from that, and as these contracts now become 1-year deals and theoretically maybe like semi-valuable to other teams, if they're looking to clear cap space for the summer of 2020, why you would do that, I don't really know. It's a really, really bad free agency class, but some teams just like to clear their books, which is not the worst strategy in the world. I think we're getting to a place where teams are a bit more fiscally conscious, and you look particularly at the TJ Warren contract. Like, I think TJ Warren would probably get slightly less than what he's on the marketplace. Like, I think you might be looking at more of like a mid-level exception deal that's, 4 years 40, 4 years 39.
About 10 a year.
Right. And he's at, I think 335 left on his deal. So It's not the worst deal in the world. Like, I think that it's reasonable for a team that has cap space to decide, hey, we really like TJ Warren. We like what he showed as a 3-point shooter this year. We like the idea of getting him as our sixth man off the bench, particularly. Like, that's a role that I think, probably will thrive in at some point in his career. He started more games for the Suns this year than came off the bench, but I think for a good team, that's probably where you want him. You want him as his sixth man that can get buckets. That's a good deal for a sixth man. Let's trade the Suns maybe a young, interesting-ish player and a second-round pick for TJ Warren. The Suns are going to get cap space. We're going to take TJ into our cap space because we think of him as an actual addition to our team. Maybe Indiana. Indiana has a lot of flexibility this summer because almost all of their guys come off the books. Thaddeus Young, Bojan Bogdanovic, forwards galore are going to be off the books for them. And they're going to have to make calls on whether or not they want to bring those guys back. TJ Warren, you can do something like, does TJ Leaf interest the Phoenix Suns? Maybe not. I don't really know, but like, could you do something like that and a second round pick? And Phoenix clears $8 million off their books.
Yeah. So it's let me ask you. Speaking of value and money, so you spent a little bit of time in a great way talking about TJ Warren's potential value there, if he was a free agent this summer. Well, a guy who is a free agent this summer, a restricted free agent, is Kelly Oubre.
Right.
The word around the league, it seems like, is that he could get an offer as in the high teens.
I would be
per year.
Yeah, I kind of noted that like, so I asked around about Kelly, particularly because I think Kelly's one of the toughest guys to gauge on this restricted free agency market, because we've seen him play in the playoffs. He's been sometimes playable, sometimes not playable. Like, Scott Brooks had to sit him for like multiple games and multiple playoff series because the defense just wasn't there, right? It wasn't there in terms of just engagedness. I guess that's kind of a word. Just didn't have the engaged mentality he needed at times. So Scott Brooks sat him. And that's concerning for a guy that has issues in regard to also spacing the floor. So you wonder, okay, is this the kind of guy that we can move into a less primary role on a good team as our better players like Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, potentially, number 3 overall pick, number 2 overall pick, number 1 overall pick in this draft, as they age and mature, how does Kelly fit into the scheme of this? I personally would probably be willing to pay Kelly I'd probably match up to 460 if I was Phoenix. So
Around
15 a year.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would go higher than that. And if I was Phoenix, I would try and get that number more around 12. He's a hard one to gauge. Some executives said maybe he's a mid-level guy. Maybe he's someone that kind of just ends up in that morass of players that teams just don't necessarily quite value. I do think teams are going to take a shot on the upside. Personally, I think his salary is going to exceed the mid-level and get right into the mid-teens. But he's a really tough one to gauge just because his production this year too, a lot of it came after the Suns were basically already eliminated and were experimenting. And I think he's done some interesting things. He can now handle on the ball a little bit. He can create a little bit more in screen scenarios. Obviously a really good advantage scorer, creating out of spot ups. His first inclination is to drive, obviously, but he's a really tough one, man. He is, to me, one of the toughest to judge. If you told me he ended up at 442, I wouldn't be totally shocked. If you told me he ended up at 470 and someone way overpaid, that
would be a laugh.
I would get that. I'd get the appeal of doing that at least.
So you look at it, you clear some cap space, you re-sign Kelly Oubre. Potentially, how do you see the Suns team filling their need at point guard? Because that has been the number one need for 18 months now, is having a competent starting point guard. What do you think they do to address that?
So the first thing is obviously what happens in the draft, right? Do they end up at number 2 realistically? People around the league think James Jones is a really big fan of Ja Morant. Really, really likes him a lot. I don't think they would take Ja at number 1 because Robert Sarver likes money, and taking or passing on Zion Williamson is just passing on so much money.
Very true.
But it's not. It shouldn't even be that kind of proposition, right?
No, it should.
Zion Williams is so much more talented.
Yes, Zion is very clearly the best player in this draft. Very, very obviously, clearly the best player. But even say that for whatever reason, James Jones and the basketball operations department has evaluated Ja Morant to be better than Zion Williamson. Or we can do this. Let's say this. Let's not even say it's incompetence on Phoenix's part. Let's say that Zion's medical checks come back with some long-term questions about how long everything holds up, right? It says right around 25, he might start to break down. Me, I would still take that. I would still be happy with 6 or 7 years of, Zion being just the freakiest athlete I've ever seen in my life. But let's say that happens and, the Suns decide, hey, we don't want to go down this road, or the basketball operations people don't really want to go down that road. I still can't imagine that Robert Sarver is going to be like, hey, let's pass on all of this money. Let's pass on all of the merchandising, all of the attendance, all of the national games. They're going to get national games. Whoever gets Zion Williamson is going to have 10 national games next year on TV. It's just crazy to me.
Right.
Well, yeah, especially, I mean, that would be the Amari situation. Even if you got those medical back and you're like, hey, 6 or 7 years. I mean, you saw that with Amari Stoudemire. He was the biggest athletic freak for those years. And it just doesn't mean that he's going to totally drop off after either. That would be such a myopic way of them looking at that for sure, and basically trying to create an excuse to take a Ja over a Zion.
Yeah, I'm just floored by this whole James Jones loves Ja Morant thing, because
I mean, I get it. Ja's good.
Sure, but this same James Jones did an interview in mid-January. So when he made the quote about that people say he made about Ja Morant, that was in March. But in mid-January, he went to great lengths to say that he just wouldn't take a 19-year-old point guard because Devin Booker is in the win now years of his life, and he's not going to wait 2 or 3 or 4 more years for a guy to develop. And he literally said point guard, and this was January when Ja Morant was clearly the number 2. So I don't see how his shift, since they don't do scouting anyway, I don't see how his shift completely changed, or his opinion completely changed in a couple of months.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much to like take James Jones at face value, like publicly at the stage yet, right? Like,
But then,
there are some guys where like you're like, oh,
either statement at face value.
Yeah, like it's really hard. And look, like, I'm talking to people from other organizations. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like I've talked to or not talked to people in the Phoenix organization necessarily, but a lot of where I talk to people comes from other organizations, and they believe that James does like Ja Morant, like a lot. Like, again, I don't think they would take Ja over Zion. I really don't.
Well,
but
let's
continue.
I was just gonna say, let's operate in the reality that with the way this franchise has not had luck, it's likely going to be the 6th or 7th pick that they wind up with. So at that point, how are you going to plug this glaring hole at point guard? How do you see them approaching this? Because a job would be nice if they wind up at 2, if we know what they'll do at 1, but say this falls in what's more statistically likely, and it's a lower pick than that. How do you look at fixing this issue?
Sure. So I think that if you end up at number 5 or 6 or whatever the most likely pick outcome is for Phoenix right now, you can look at taking another lead guard, right? Like Darius Garland's there, Kobe White's there from North Carolina. I think Kobe White would be pretty interesting in a lot of ways. But if you're going to do that, I think you also do need to take another, free agent flyer on a guard, be it a Terry Rozier, be it maybe you take Ricky Rubio for like a 2-year, $40 million deal, if you can do that.
What about Corey Joseph?
Sure. Corey Joseph is fine. Like, one thing that I threw out there in the story I wrote would be maybe like Josh Jackson for Fred VanVleet or something like that, if the Raptors lose Kawhi and then like kind of want to retool a little bit and maybe go toward more of a long-term approach. I mean, like, I would love to talk to you guys about Josh Jackson, because I have no fucking idea what to do with Josh Jackson.
Josh Jackson is, I'll tell you right now, in a nutshell, in one statement, Josh Jackson is a higher drafted Archie Goodwin.
Wow,
that's tough.
Dave, I don't think that's necessarily fair. I think he's a victim of some of this chaos that's gone on too. Because if you look at it, this guy has had 3 coaches in 2 years, no stability in it, and he seems like a guy that really needs that leadership, somebody to help pull out the talent that is there. There's no denying that there's talent there, but it's not focused. And when this kid is focused and that energy is put in the right place, he can play pretty well. You saw in the second half of both of his first 2 seasons, you saw flashes of the guy that you thought you were going to get in the draft. I think within the right situation, with the right kind of coaching and maybe some veteran leadership around him, he could blossom into the guy that people expected. I don't think he's going to be a flame out like Archie Goodwin. And Archie Goodwin was great at stuffing the stat sheet within 2 feet of the rim, but couldn't do anything else. But I get the point, Dave. But I think there's certainly more talent there, but if it goes untapped in a situation where there's not stability, I could see it devolving into an Archie Goodwin type situation.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be out of the NBA like Archie was. I mean, like, the quick twitch athleticism's there. Athleticism is, I think, even higher than what Archie's was. You look at the feel for the game. He does make the maddening mistakes, but then you do see the flashes where you're like, oh, he does things that like nobody else on the court can do. You know what I mean? So I don't think he's like out of the NBA at some point. I just wonder, like,
no, he's going to get a 10-year career because he was the 4th pick in the draft. But they're just
that too.
There are some similarities. I mean, you've got Both had broken jumpers that felt like their jumpers were much better than they actually were. Both drove hard to the basket. And Greg, you watch as much Suns as I do. They have similar ability to finish at the rim, which is half the time they're getting blocked versus finishing because they don't rise above the other players. Their release is very close to their head, and they don't have a lot of midair wiggle and adjustments that they can make with the ball. And so you see guys lining up from literally 10 feet away, timing a block on a windmill dunk that Jackson's trying to make in traffic, and they time it perfectly because he can't adjust in the air when he sees the defense coming. I mean, look, Josh Jackson plays hard and he means well, and he's got a much better attitude than Archie ever did. Archie succumbed to the "I'm too good for this game" kind of thing too much, and Josh does feel like he's better than he is, but he tries so hard. The problem is the maddening decisions that he makes in real time, and his inability to recognize that he needs to improve in some areas that he needs to improve in.
Yeah, so like trying to put all of that, because like I agree with everything that you guys just said. Like that is 100% where I'm at too. It's just like, how do you put all of that into context whenever you have to make a decision on essentially a $9 million option for the 2021 season? Like that's not pocket change. Like that's not like we should definitely 100% pick this up option, because like I think that at the end of the day, if they don't move him this summer, they probably should pick it up, just because the risk of not picking it up is very dangerous if he ends up becoming something useful. And look, like at the end of the day, Josh is someone that you do want to bet on in a way, because he is such a hard worker. He does come into games at least with an attitude that, you know, he wants to be a positive force of change. But you also just have that kind of concern in the back of your mind where you wonder if the light bulb is ever going to click on in regard to decision making. And I'm with you guys. I am unclear on if that's going to happen. And because of it, like I would really look into, you know, moving him this summer just so I didn't have to make that decision. I would try and get like commensurate value, and maybe you can't get commensurate value because everyone around the NBA sees him as a distressed asset. And they're like, you know, do we really want to go down this road? I think some team would still be willing to take the shot, though.
So he's on for $7 million next year on the books. Do you feel like that there is value in a trade offer of the number 3 pick, TJ Warren and Josh Jackson, for a young mid-career lead guard?
Yeah, the name that I threw out there was, I didn't even throw out Josh, but I did like mention, like, you know, could Josh Jackson be like a Mike Conley trade chip, right? My idea for Mike Conley was like if they end up with like number 4 or number 5 pick or number 3, do TJ Warren, Tyler Johnson, and that pick for Mike Conley. I really like Mike. I think he's an adult in a way that, again, they just need adults in the backcourt. They need to start winning games so that these young kids learn just what competitive basketball at the highest level is like.
And just making the right plays, like making the not dumb plays. How about that?
Right.
I mean, they played. I love Jamal Crawford as an influence in the locker room, as a teammate and all that, but he's not a point guard. You know, he never was. And he tried really hard this year to fill in a gap that the team needed. He just he wasn't really good at it. And then the other 2 options were 21-year-old rookies, both of whom had not been a lead guard for more than a year of their lives before coming to the Suns this past year. Elie Okobo was only the point guard for a year over in France in a low-level league. And then obviously we all know De'Anthony Melton played 1 year in college as a combo guard. And then sat out a year. So that's what the Suns had to deal with. So Tyler Johnson was just like, oh, so wonderful. You bring in a Mike Conley or someone along that line, that level of a near all-star, and I really think the team can be a completely different looking team.
Yeah, I agree. And part of it is putting Deandre DeAndre Ayton in more favorable positions. Like DeAndre had created a lot of his offense out of the post this year. He didn't like DeAndre should be one of the premier pick and roll threats in the NBA, and he just didn't necessarily get that opportunity to do that this year, which is just a missed opportunity, I would say, I guess, the end of
Well,
the
you
day.
know, DeAndre Ayton, you pointed it out in your own article, I believe, that he put up numbers that almost no center in history has put up as a 20-year-old rookie.
Yeah.
And he actually had some of the most shot attempts in the league as a 20-year-old center, rookie center as well. I know a lot of people wanted him to be much more of a threat in the pick and roll, much more of especially as a roller toward the basket. And he's got the feet, and he figured out a spin move all by himself this year, just on the move spin move. It's just incredible, both directions. But I think what I really like about Igor is, despite all the clamoring and all the complaints and all the arguments, Igor kept people in their lanes this year. The only one he didn't control, I guess, was Josh. But DeAndre Ayton didn't take a single shot outside 15 feet. And he knew what he was doing. Richaun Holmes has made a comment since the end of the season that he's going to go back to his days as a 3-point shooter next year for whatever team he plays for, because his role on the Suns was simply as a pick and roll finisher near the basket. Igor kept people in their roles, and he didn't overplay point Book with Booker as a point guard. He tried so hard not to do that. And guys improved throughout the year. And I think DeAndre Ayton is only scratching the surface of his future. Igor said at the beginning of the season, he's going to be a center. He's going to stay near the basket. He's going to improve and learn how to play defense. And he's going to make the easy shots. And that's all I ask. And that's all DeAndre Ayton did. And I think we've seen very little of the future of DeAndre Ayton, and it's already pretty darn good.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with all of that. And the thing is, though, with that, wow, it's very early, guys. This English for me is like poor right now.
That's okay. We have the same issues.
The thing is with DeAndre is that if he is this limited guy, like that he showcased this year, it was not worth the number 1 overall pick, just because, as we've seen across the NBA, for instance, in the playoffs, like it's hard to be a center and make a significant impact in the playoffs, right? Like I think DeAndre is particularly potentially situated to being a good playoff performer because he can really move in space. He can defend out on the perimeter. Great feet. And like, I don't even think his footwork is all that clean yet, and he still has great feet. Right. So I look at all of this and I'm like, okay, that's fine. But when you take a DeAndre Ayton over Luka Doncic, over, Trae Young, over X, Y, and Z, Jaren Jackson, etc., you're doing it because you think he can be more than just like the simplified role center. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I think this was just 20-year-old DeAndre. Also, for those around the team all the time, and I know you talk to a lot of people, but I don't know how much you talk to DeAndre. The dude is like a 12-year-old. He's a kid, and he spent the entire season basically treating the NBA like Disneyland. And the coach knew it. He didn't have the maturity. I mean, he would literally in the middle of a game do the fan reaction on some shots where he'd drop his jaw and he'd freeze and he'd go, oh my God, and look around, kind of like just the rest of us. In the middle of a game, while he was supposed to corral the rebound, he'd still corral the rebound.
DeAndre is the best.
He is awesome because he just loves being around. And so part of the limited role was let the kid just be a kid for a little bit and let him grow into it. He's got to decide when he's going to be a grown-up. And hopefully that's the next year or two versus never. But this year was not the year to make the NBA the worst thing ever for him. I mean, it was already bad enough losing all the games. If you can't make it at least a little bit fun, then, he could be jaded the rest of his career.
Well, Sam, final one here.
Sorry to keep it so long, Sam.
Well,
no, you're good. I'm just hanging out this morning. Fiance is out downtown right now, so I'm just drinking a coffee and hanging out.
Did you say Beyonce or fiance? Because it puts you in a different stratosphere depending on which one you said. So
Definitely fiance.
Okay. Well, last question here. In talking to people around the league about the Suns, have you gotten any sense on what they're looking at from from the standpoint of Igor Kokoskov and what they're hoping to do there?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I haven't asked a lot about Igor just because I find it very weird that his job is apparently up for debate in a way. Like you just hear the reports, right? That some people think there is a real chance that he might be let go. I honestly don't really have any sort of, inside intelligence there. I would be speculating otherwise, and that's probably not fair to Igor. In regard to job performance this year, I mean, he did some just, it was a broken roster. I would give him a second year just because, I would want to see what he can do with lead guards because his style of play and his scheme is very dependent on having guys who can actually run an offense. Devin can run an offense, sort of, but it's not as clean as what an established guy for instance Goran Dragic when he coaches the Slovenian national team, or potentially a Mike Conley if they go out and try and make a move like that. So I would be interested to see him with more of a traditional lead guard and would be intrigued in giving him a second year because of it. And like you guys said, it's not that the players didn't make development throughout the course of the season. I thought Deandre got better defensively throughout the course of the season. I thought Mikhail got better throughout the course of the season. Kelly Oubre was starting games and averaging 20 points a night in his final, I think, 11 games that he played before getting hurt. So he's not stunning the development of players. He is, I mean, look, they won 19 games, so I can't really say anything if they fire him, but right. I would give him another year just to kind of see what they can do.
So I'd like to almost attribute it to when Brett Brown started with the Sixers. And I'm not saying Igor is as good a coach as Brett Brown, but Brett Brown survived 15 and 10 win seasons because they knew the players were developing and the players were, he was building basketball players. And I think so far that's what Igor has shown as opposed to the prior coaches the Suns have had recently.
And it's something that's worth mentioning too, that guys like Devin Booker are saying the culture has gotten better. We feel like we do know what it takes to win. If Devin was out here shitting on the coach, that'd be a problem, right? If there was even some sort of passive aggressiveness toward the coach, that'd be a problem. And I mean, you guys are a lot closer to the situation than I am, but I don't really see that in regard to Igor all that much.
No, actually, when he was days from getting fired, that's when they went on their run of winning 6 games out of 10. They all really rallied around him. They didn't go to bat and say, "We love Igor" to the press, but they definitely played their best basketball when he was on his shakiest ground.
Yeah, so it's just he's a very interesting coach to me. I'll be very intrigued by what happens with the Suns going forward. Honestly, I wrote 8,000 words and I feel like I could have I had to edit myself on the Suns because I legit find their situation fascinating. We started the conversation by saying how did you draw the short straw? I honestly didn't see it that honestly, I find the Suns fascinating. I really do. They're one of the most interesting long-term teams right now, if only because they do have the core in the in the outlines of a very intriguing team long term.
And finally, somebody has made me feel better about dedicating 3 years of my life to doing this podcast for free. He is Sam Vecenie. Right. You can find him on Twitter at Sam_Vecenie. You can read all of his work, including that 8,000 word piece about the Suns over at The Athletic. And you can listen to him on the Game Theory podcast. Sam, really appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah, of course, guys. Anytime.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sam.
All right.